At precisely 11 p.m. every night, my wife begins to cry, her muffled sobs echoing through the thin walls of our modest home, a haunting serenade that's become my grim lullaby. It started 3 months ago, just days after she returned from her mother's funeral, leaving behind not just a whisper of grief but something far more unsettling, something I'd come to fear in the quiet hours when darkness envelops our lives. At first, I thought it was just the weight of her loss, an understandable expression of sorrow that would eventually fade away as time offered its familiar comfort, but as the nights dragged on, her tears became a source of unease, filling the air with a strange, suffocating tension that made my heart pound and sleep impossible. I tried to console her, offering words of love and support, but she would only shake her head, her eyes downcast as if the very act of looking at me was too much to bear. Some nights, I would sit up in bed, listening to the soft, desperate whimpers that clawed at my insides, feeling helpless but not willing to intrude upon her grief. Yet deep down, an instinct told me something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the sadness, it was the unmistakable feeling that her sorrow was fueled by something more than memories and loss. One evening, driven by concern and fear, I mustered the courage to enter the dimly lit room where my wife sat, the faint glow of the clock casting morose shadows across her face, and as I pulled her into a tentative embrace, her sobs became sharp and jagged, transforming into gasps as though each breath was ripped from her chest. She whispered a name between tears, Lila, and I froze, recognizing it as her younger sister who died tragically in a car accident years prior, a pain buried beneath layers of familial duty and unspoken words. As I tried to scratch the surface of her grief, she suddenly recoiled, her gaze wide and wild, filled with a terror I hadn't seen before, and she uttered a chilling phrase that sent chills cascading down my spine. "She's calling for me." The statement hung heavily in the air, and my rational mind scurried to dismiss the idea, attributing it to emotional turmoil. But that night I found little solace in slumber, instead lying awake with dread pooling in my stomach, plagued by thoughts of what she might mean, whether Lila's soul hungered for her, or if there was something lurking on the edge of our lives. The following nights were even worse, the crying evolving into a haunting melody, an intimate lamenting fused with an otherworldly cadence that danced around the edges of my consciousness. I began to research, combing through articles and forums, digging up folklore about spirits and the connections we share, and my obsession grew until I made a discovery. Often, it is said, the departed return to those who grieve them, trying to take them away. Desperation washed over me, and I sought out help. Psychics, mediums, anyone who might make sense of my wife's nightly torment. One evening, I brought a local medium home, a vivacious woman with eerily sharp features who waved her hands as if conjuring spirits from the depths of the shadows. My wife sat on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the floor while the medium began the ritual, lighting candles and whispering secrets known only to the unseen. Within moments, the room felt stifling, tension thickening like fog, and then, to my horror, my wife began to cry again, but this time, her sobs morphed into pleading wails that were an echo of rage, confusion, and fear. The medium's demeanor shifted to one of alarm as if she sensed an uninvited presence in the room. With shaking hands, she asked what I had unleashed by summoning her sister, but I was oblivious, taking her words as hints of superstition. Then, inexplicably, the medium recoiled as if slapped, her voice trembling as she whispered, "There's something else here, something she's unaware of." And before I could ask for clarification, my wife burst free from the couch, her eyes wide and unrecognizable, fractured by shadows that danced behind her gaze. As she screamed Lila's name, mingling the past with the present, the lights flickered as if the very house lamented the souls trapped in its walls, and amidst it all, the medium faded into fear, becoming an unwitting prisoner of our haunting. I had no choice but to intervene, grasping my wife's shoulders in a desperate bid to bring her back into this reality, and with a frantic jerk, I pulled her into me, whispering reassurances. Yet within seconds, her anguished cries turned into a sound of sheer terror, and she began to shake violently as her body fought against something invisible, something rooted deep within her that had awoken that night. Against my better judgment, I plunged into the murky depths of our past, uncovering family secrets and whispered fears until finally, I stumbled across a worn journal that detailed Lila's tragic life. It contained tales of a darkness that followed her, a bitterness that seeped into her very essence before her untimely end, and in those words, I found the truth, a binding curse meant to lead through bloodlines, to drown the living in the desolation left behind by the dead. As the hour approached 11 p.m. again, dread coiling around my throat, I felt the tremors begin in my wife's body, the weeping manifesting anew, and this time, I feared for my life as well as hers. Instead of words, I gathered every ounce of love I could muster and pressed tightly against her, shutting my eyes against the encroaching horror of that inevitable witching hour, hoping to stave off my impending fate. In that moment, I knew Lila's spirit didn't merely seek to contact us but demanded revenge, her cries ripping through the fabric of our existence, and as I braced for the relentless vortex of rage and sorrow to engulf us, the last flicker of light succumbed to the darkness, leaving only the sound of my wife's cries, echoing in a way that felt all too real, an anguished plea that whispered from the depths of despair, forever ringing in my ears. And that's when I understood, sometimes, the dead don't just visit, sometimes, they come to collect.
When I met my best friend's parents, the awkward encounter. It was the day I had been dreading for weeks. My best friend, Emily, had been asking me to meet her parents for months, but I kept putting it off, not because I didn't want to meet them, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready for the inevitable awkwardness. I had heard stories about her parents, how they were traditional, strict, and expected a lot from the people Emily surrounded herself with, especially her friends. I was nervous, not knowing what to expect. I had been friends with Emily for years, but meeting her parents felt like a rite of passage I wasn't sure I was prepared for. It all started on a Saturday afternoon when Emily called me, asking if I wanted to come over for dinner. I hesitated for a moment, knowing what that meant, but I agreed. I spent the entire afternoon psyching myself up, trying to figure out what to wear, how to act, and what to say. I knew I had to be on my best behavior, but I also didn't want to come off as stiff and forced. I wanted them to like me, but I didn't want to pretend to be someone I wasn't. By the time I arrived at Emily's house, I was already a bundle of nerves. I parked my car in front of the house, took a deep breath, and forced myself to walk up to the front door. Emily greeted me with her usual warm smile, and I could tell she was just as excited for me to meet her parents as I was terrified. "You're going to be fine," she assured me. "They're not as scary as they seem." Easy for her to say. She had known them her entire life. I followed her inside, where the smell of a home-cooked meal hit me immediately. It was comforting but also made my stomach turn with anxiety. I wasn't sure if it was the food or the situation. Emily led me to the dining room, where her parents were already sitting. Her dad was in his usual spot at the head of the table, a man with a firm handshake and a serious expression. He was a lawyer, the type of person who always seemed like he was analyzing everything around him. Her mom, on the other hand, was more approachable, but her eyes always seemed to be scrutinizing me as if she could see right through me. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I had just walked into an interview. Emily introduced me, and her parents gave me polite smiles, but I could tell they weren't exactly thrilled about my presence. "It's nice to meet you," Emily's dad said with a firm handshake, his voice deep and authoritative. "Emily has told us a lot about you." I nodded, trying to hide my nerves. "It's great to meet you too, Mr. and Mrs. Davis." I tried to sound confident, but I was sure I sounded like a nervous wreck. "Please, call us Mark and Linda," her mom said, her smile softening a little. "We're so glad you could join us for dinner." I sat down, and the awkward silence that followed was deafening. Everyone was busy serving themselves, avoiding eye contact with me as I tried to figure out how to break the ice. I could already tell. I was out of my element. I wasn't used to these kinds of formal dinners. I was more of a pizza and movie night kind of person, not one to sit at a dining table with fine china and crystal glasses. I picked up my fork, pretending to be interested in the food while my mind raced. I had no idea what to say. I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to start the conversation or if I should wait for them to speak first. I could feel Emily's gaze on me, and I knew she was probably just as uncomfortable as I was. She always told me that her parents were great, but I could tell she was worried about me fitting in. I cleared my throat and decided to try to initiate some small talk. "So, Mr. Davis, what's it like being a lawyer? That must be an interesting job." He didn't look up from his plate but replied, "It's challenging, but rewarding. Lots of paperwork. Lots of arguing." I nodded, trying to appear interested, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't even sure if he was being sarcastic or not. Then, Linda, Emily's mom, chimed in, "Have you been to any nice places recently, Emily? I heard you've been traveling a lot for work." Emily nodded, and the conversation turned toward her job. I tried to keep up with the conversation, but I could feel myself getting more and more nervous. My palms were sweating, and every time I tried to make eye contact with either of them, I felt like I was being judged. I took a sip of water to calm my nerves and accidentally knocked over my glass, sending it sliding across the table. I gasped as it tipped over, and water splashed across the table, spilling onto the white tablecloth. The room went completely silent. I froze, unsure of what to do. "Oh, no. I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, grabbing a napkin to try to clean it up. But it was too late, the damage was done. Linda's eyes narrowed, and Mark simply sighed, shaking his head. "It's fine," he said, but his tone made it clear that it wasn't. I felt my face turn bright red. Emily quickly got up to help, but I could tell she was mortified, probably wishing I had just stayed home. The rest of the dinner continued, but the mood had shifted. Every time I tried to speak, my words seemed to come out wrong. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong move would send everything crashing down. It wasn't until dessert, when the conversation shifted to more neutral ground, that things started to ease up a little. Emily's mom started talking about her love for gardening, and Mark chimed in with his obsession with fishing. I managed to squeeze in a few words, but the awkwardness was still hanging in the air. When dinner was finally over, I thought I would be able to breathe a sigh of relief, but Emily's parents insisted on showing me around the house. I followed them, nodding politely, but my anxiety was at an all-time high. They took me to the family room, where pictures of Emily and her siblings lined the walls. They were all smiling and happy, a perfect family in a perfect home. I couldn't help but feel like I didn't belong there. As we toured the rest of the house, Emily's dad told me about his extensive wine collection, and her mom gave me a lecture on the importance of good table manners. I nodded along, but inside, I was dying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was time to leave. Emily walked me to the door, and I could tell she was just as relieved as I was. "I'm so sorry about everything," I said, feeling like I had made a complete fool of myself. "Don't worry about it," Emily said, giving me a hug. "They're a little intense, but they like you. Trust me." I wasn't sure if she was just being polite or if she genuinely believed that, but I appreciated the reassurance. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but replay every awkward moment in my head. I had been too nervous, too eager to impress, and it had all backfired. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to get past the awkwardness, but one thing was for sure, I would never look at dinner with Emily's parents the same way again. I never believed in taking time for myself. I was the kind of person who thought self-care was a joke. I'd see articles about meditation, bubble baths, and journaling, and I'd roll my eyes. Who had time for that? My job at the accounting firm consumed my life, and I prided myself on being the hardest worker in the office. My colleagues would stay late, but I'd be the last to leave, preparing financial reports and staring into my screen like a digital zombie. Over the years, my health started to decline. Headaches became a constant, my back hurt from hours hunched over the keyboard, and the endless cycle of caffeine and stress was the only rhythm my body knew. Then came the night that altered everything. It started as a regular Tuesday. I was slated to finish up a month's worth of financial statements when a storm rolled in, heavy rain lashing against the office windows. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. My coworker, Marissa, a bubbly woman who always pushed me to join her for yoga sessions, glanced at the storm with concern. "You should take a break, Ryan. It's getting pretty bad out there." I shrugged her off, announcing I'd be fine. A soft whistle passed through the drafts of the office. "You're working too hard, you know. Burnout's a real thing." I waved her off, and she begrudgingly returned to her desk with a resigned sigh. Hours crawled by, shadows growing deeper as the sky darkened. I was lost in an Excel spreadsheet when the lights flickered and went out. A citywide blackout had left our office in uncomfortable darkness. The sound of the storm grew louder, the wind howling through the cracks. Great, I thought. Just my luck. I'm stuck here in this miserable place with no power, forced to contend with my thoughts. As I checked my phone for any signal, I saw a few missed messages. Marissa had texted, asking if I was okay, but there was no point in replying. I was fine. Then the temperature dropped like a stone. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and decided to check the windows. As I walked across the darkened office floor, the shadows danced in strange shapes, and the wind howled outside like a pack of wolves. It's just the storm, I told myself firmly, trying to rid my thoughts of absurd images of paranormal entities. I reached the window, pushing against the cold glass. I could hardly see through the rain, only flashes of lightning illuminating my dim office. I suddenly felt a shiver, not from the cold, but a prickle of fear that rippled down my spine. Something didn't feel right. I turned back towards my desk, but my movement froze in place. Out of the corner of my eye, something dark seemed to flicker on the opposite wall. I squinted, blinking at the shapes that slipped in and out of the shadows. The fear tightened in my stomach, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. No one else was in the office, maybe I was just tired. Just as I turned back towards my desk, my phone vibrated in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out, seeing a message from Marissa. "Ryan, please leave. You shouldn't be alone." I rolled my eyes, the usual bravado rising again. I didn't need to listen to her. I was going to finish my work. I flipped my phone back into my pocket and tried to ignore the growing sense of dread. The light pulses of lightning illuminated the entire office, casting eerie shadows that seemed to breathe. I turned my back to it and concentrated on my work. I was writing up a particularly complex entry when all at once, the silence of the storm shattered with a loud crash. My heart thundered in my chest as I turned back to the window, the glass rattled violently. Overhead, darkness loomed, pressed against the walls of the structure while the howling wind twisted into something almost human, calling out to me. Was I losing my mind? I forced myself back to work, but the shadows at the corner of my eye grew more persistent. A flicker here, a silhouette there. Each crack of thunder was accompanied by a resounding whisper that echoed in the silence, urging me to turn and look. "Ryan, get out." The voice was soft yet insistent, resonating with a gnawing insistence that tugged at my gut. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and shouted out into the dark office, "Is someone there?" Of course, no one answered. My heart raced as a shiver of true terror coursed through me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed my bag and headed toward the emergency exit, determined to leave. As I turned, I heard a distinct sound, a light laugh that shouldn't have been there, echoing from the corner of the room where the shadows twisted like living things. I froze, every instinct telling me to run. But my curiosity was stronger. I slowly approached the source, heart hammering against my ribcage, only for everything to go dark. The lights flickered back to life, illuminating the stark room, but there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine as I stumbled back to the exit, pushing against the door as panic gripped my throat. It swung open with a release, and I ran. I hurried down the dimly lit hall toward the stairwell, every instinct screaming at me to get to safety. As I descended, I could hear whispers echoing behind me, calling my name in soft tones that felt both familiar and sinister. "Ryan, come closer. We're waiting for you." The moment I stepped outside, I was hit with the cold rain. The storm had weakened, but the memory of those whispers lingered like fog. I stumbled into my car, locking the doors and breathing heavily. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had broken within me that night. Once home, I tossed my bags aside and collapsed on the couch, drenched in cold sweat. I could still hear the whispers, deep in my mind, clawing at me. The next day, I told Marissa what happened, and she looked horrified. "Ryan, this isn't normal. You haven't been taking care of yourself. You need to slow down. Your mind is starting to fracture." Her words struck something deep within me, a truth I could no longer deny. For days, I wrestled with the truths that haunted me. I was constantly exhausted, on the verge of collapse, and I had ignored the simplest of all human needs. I began taking small steps. I meditated when I woke, allowing myself just 5 minutes in silence. I swapped coffee for herbal tea, enrolled in a yoga class, and took long walks in the park. The world blossomed before me, each moment unspooling in vibrant color. I felt myself beginning to heal as I took more time to care for who I truly was. I learned to listen to my body, the whispers of the past quieted as my spirit rebuilt itself. Months passed, and I thought I was finally free, until one late evening while cleaning out my office closet, I found an old notebook I used to jot down thoughts. I flipped through it, memories flooding back. But as I read my own handwriting, a chill ran through my body. Scrawled on the last page, in strange slanted letters, were the last words I'd written before that horrid night. "I think it's coming for me." I slammed the notebook shut and rushed to my closet, but the shadows twisted again, and for a haunting moment, I felt that warm whisper return. "Ryan, come closer. The shadows coiled tighter around me, wrapping their fingers across my mind, but I clenched my jaw, teleporting back to those days where my life had revolved around work. I'd defeated the shadows once, and I would do it again. I allowed the warmth of my self-care routine to wash over me. Each meditation, every yoga class, every hour spent in quiet reflection required a fight against those sinister whispers. The journey had shown me what I truly needed. Not just power, stability, or work, but peace. And now, as I faced the darkness again, I knew that I was stronger than the whispers that haunted me. I discovered the importance of self-care, and I was never going back. I remember the creeping sense of dread as the invite to the group meeting landed in my inbox. This wasn't just any meeting, it was an assembly of my colleagues, a chance to share ideas and strategies. It had become a notorious focal point of whispered office gossip. Too many had walked in with confidence, only to come out looking like lost souls, drowned in a sea of skepticism and critique. I'd spent weeks mentally rehearsing talking points, but as the day approached, the heart of my voice was drowning beneath anxiety. It felt as if everyone else had a microphone while I struggled with a whisper. The day arrived. It was a chilly Thursday afternoon when we gathered in the conference room. Glassy-eyed, I took my seat among more seasoned employees, their confidence palpable. They chatted casually, a practiced ease hanging in their laughter. And there I was, the quiet one, the outsider looking in. What could I possibly contribute? A few moments into the meeting, the facilitator, Mark, a man known for his booming presence, proposed we each share our thoughts about a new project. My palms began to sweat. My heart raced. I shuffled in my seat, rehearsing my lines yet again, searching for the courage to speak. One by one, my colleagues spoke, and I tried to absorb their words, but each one washed over me like a tidal wave. Striking words flew like darts, comments sharp as knives. I felt a lump in my throat, choking down my unease. The more they spoke, the tighter the grip of fear became. I wanted to scream, I am here. I have ideas too. My thoughts screamed louder than my words ever could. Each voice cut through the air, vibrant and strong, while I remained still, drowning in the depths of self-doubt. Suddenly, it was my turn. I could feel every eye in the room, the weight of their stares pressing against me, and I froze. Nothing but white noise flooded my mind, a cacophony of self-loathing almost deafening. That's when I noticed the flickering light above me, barely perceptible. I blinked and tried to focus on my colleagues seated around the polished table, but it was as if a veil came down, isolating me in my turmoil. My heart was thundering as I felt the flicker turn into a flicker of something like hope. Amidst this dreadful overshadow of anxiety, something primal ignited within me. Perhaps it was desperation, or maybe the need to reclaim my space, to be heard amidst the chaos. The flickering light suddenly expanded in my mind, illuminating the darkness where my fears festered. As if propelled by some unseen force, my lips parted, and what came spilling out was unexpected. I believe we could approach this project by focusing on the user experience more intimately. The words flowed, uncoiling like a spring after being compressed for too long, a sudden burst of sound in the silence that followed my initial statement. I noticed the surprised glances, a few heads nodding. Maybe they were listening, maybe I hadn't been voiceless after all. Encouraged by their attention, I continued, weaving in ideas I had tucked away for so long, concepts I believed could breathe life into the project. They took me seriously, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. I felt a shift within the room, a tangible energy igniting as I spoke. It was like a dark cloud lifting, casting light in every corner of my mind. When I finished, I sat back as if I'd just leapt from a dizzying height, the adrenaline rushing through me. The room was lively now, discussions sparking like fireworks. My heart was still racing, but in a thrilling way. Suddenly, I wasn't the outsider anymore, I belonged in that vibrant exchange of ideas. As the meeting progressed, I found myself being called upon to share more. The flickering light that had emerged in the midst of my fear now shone brightly with each positive exchange. When the meeting concluded, Mark approached me, a genuine smile on his face. "Great insights today," he said, and I felt an unexpected rush of warmth envelop me, validation, a recognition of my presence, my voice. As I left the conference room, I couldn't stop smiling. I realized the darkness hadn't entirely vanished, it still lurked in the corners of my mind, but I had taken a step towards illumination. The moment I found my voice didn't come from a place of perfection but rather a willingness to confront the shadows that threatened to keep me silent. That day, I stepped into the realm of the expressive, and it felt like a birth of fortitude within me. I left that meeting not just with my ideas validated but invigorated by the idea that I could reclaim my narrative. In the following weeks, I continued to speak up, each moment I took the chance to share becoming a thread in the tapestry of my newfound confidence. I heard laughter and shared insights with my colleagues, their initial judgment fading into acceptance. I understood now that the flickering light was not just a fleeting moment, it was a personal revolution. I was finally part of the collective rhythm instead of just existing in its shadow. As time went on, others began to approach me too, those who had once been too shy to share their thoughts, drawing inspiration from the changes they saw in me. The office morphed into a safe space for dialogue, ideas flourishing instead of wilting beneath the weight of judgment. I realized that finding one's voice is a journey uniquely stripped of absolutes. It's about embracing vulnerability, silencing the fear-mongering thoughts, and finding strength in expression. It's a powerful act of defiance against the silence, against the expectations written gingerly on the scroll of societal constraints. Where I had once felt like an intruder in that room, I now understood what it meant to be a part of something bigger, a flourishing symphony of voices each playing their role. The moment I found my voice in that group setting didn't just echo in that one meeting, it resonated throughout everything I did afterward. Not just for me, but for others too. In the heart of fear, we can find not just our voice but a chorus echoing back at us, reminding us that we are never truly alone. Sometimes all it takes is embracing our flickering lights to illuminate the world around us. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, sitting in my dimly lit living room, the flickering light of my laptop casting strange shadows along the walls. I can hardly believe what happened a few months ago, and I still don't know if I'm more terrified or grateful for the experience that transformed my entire existence. It was a chilly evening when I first noticed the strange advertisement. It was an unassuming flyer, barely fluttering in the wind, plastered on the bulletin board at the corner cafe I frequented. It simply read, "Embrace Change Workshop, Transform Your Life, Limited Seats Available." I laughed it off as yet another gimmick but couldn't shake the feeling that something about it pulled at me. Maybe it was the monotony of my life that had begun to gnaw at me, or perhaps I was just curious. After days of wrestling with my thoughts, I finally decided to call the number printed below. The voice on the other end was smooth and inviting, and I felt an odd sense of comfort as I shared my struggles of feeling trapped in a routine that no longer served me. "You're ready for a change," she said, and I thought about how much I wanted to agree with her, how much I wanted to believe that was true. With a mix of excitement and dread, I signed up for the workshop, not knowing that it would turn my life upside down. The first session took place in a small, dimly lit room filled with mismatched chairs and a faint smell of incense that hung in the air. I remember feeling a tingle of uncertainty as I entered, spotting a group of participants who looked just as lost and desperate for change as I was. The leader, a woman with intense eyes and an almost ethereal presence named Mara, introduced the concept of embracing the unknown. "You have to let the old version of yourself die to give birth to a new one," she proclaimed, and I felt chills spike down my spine, yet I was drawn in. Over the next few weeks, I was subjected to various bizarre exercises. We danced in circles, burned symbolic images of our past, even faced our greatest fears in imaginative scenarios. I started to change in subtle ways, my clothing became brighter, my thoughts less negative, but it all came to a head one fateful evening. Mara announced we would undertake a night walk through the woods behind the center, a journey she claimed would force us to confront our deepest fears. I hesitated but reminded myself that embracing change required courage. As we stepped into the cool embrace of darkness, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The forest beckoned, its shadows whispering secrets long buried. I walked alongside the others, their nervous laughter echoing through the trees. We reached a clearing nestled between the towering oaks, and there Mara instructed us to stand in a circle, holding hands. She told us to close our eyes and envision what we feared most. The silence felt oppressive, thick enough to cut with a knife. As I stood there, eyes shut, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart raced. I felt it, breath on my neck, a presence behind me. Something instinctual within me screamed to open my eyes, but instead, I focused on my fear. A pair of hands grasped my shoulders harshly, and I nearly screamed when Mara's voice cut through the veil of darkness. "What do you see?" I took a breath, forced myself to respond, and in that moment, the floodgates opened. I felt my old insecurities, my fears of inadequacy, the sense that I never belonged, all rise to the surface. "I see a ghost," I whispered, my voice trembling. Mara continued probing, guiding me deeper into this abyss where I confronted my past, failed relationships, lost opportunities, a life unlived. The ghost morphed into familiar faces, people who hurt me or who I felt let me down. Yet as I faced them, I felt something strange rising within me. There was anger, yes, but also a sense of relief. Maybe it was the group's energy, but in that moment, I realized that the past was over. I screamed, releasing everything in a primal way I never knew I needed to. The echo rebounded off the trees, carrying my pain away. When I opened my eyes, the night felt different, everything seemed brighter. The others were looking at me, a mix of sympathy and understanding in their gazes. Mara told us we had crossed over, had changed something fundamental in us. But I didn't quite believe her until something absolutely extraordinary happened on the way back. As we walked, I spotted a flickering light deep within the trees. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, pulling me closer. "What is that?" I muttered, my heart pounding hard against my chest. Mara held me back, her expression serious. "Don't go there. That's not part of the transformation." But my feet seemed to move of their own volition. I felt a compulsion, a calling unlike anything I had experienced, despite Mara's warning lurking at the back of my mind. I stumbled into the clearing, the light intensifying around me, and that's when I saw it, a small, intricately carved mirror hanging from a low branch, glowing with an inner fire. The moment I reached for it, I felt a jolt of energy surge through my body, and the air grew thick and suffocating. I saw reflections that weren't my own, my future selves, branching off into a million possible lives. Each represented a choice I could make, a different path. But with every flicker, I also felt a profound emptiness, a weight of what could never be. I blinked, and the scene shattered around me. Suddenly, everything went dark. Panic surged within me, I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was falling through the void, and just as despair threatened to swallow me whole, I felt hands on me again, steady and sure. It was Mara and the group, pulling me back, reminding me that whatever existed in the mirror was an illusion, a distraction. I felt their strength envelop me, we were in this together. And just like that, I was back in the forest, the mirror fading away. I knew, in that moment, that my transformation wouldn't just be a solitary journey, it was an exploration of what it meant to coexist, to be part of something larger. Somehow embracing change often meant embracing others. That night I returned home, emotions swirling unsteadily within me, but instead of fear or sadness, I felt empowered. I started to rebuild my life actively instead of merely reacting. I reconnected with old friends, explored new activities, and even started a side project I had abandoned long ago. Change didn't happen overnight, but gradually, I noticed the world around me transforming alongside me. My vibrant imaginations of the future became a guiding beacon through mundane days, transforming how I interacted with others, leading me to dive deeper into life, myself, and even the darkness I once feared. But I'll never forget that ghost or the shimmering mirror, and something tells me the transformation is still ongoing. I know there's so much more ahead in this journey of change, but every day I wake up more willing to embrace it, and for that, I am eternally grateful. I may have entered that workshop seeking some scripted guide to transformation, and instead, I found raw truth in change itself, leading me on the adventure of a lifetime, one step, one glance, one terrifying leap into the unknown at a time. The family dinner that turned into chaos, here's what went down. It was supposed to be a normal family dinner, one of those rare occasions when everyone managed to carve out some time to come together, share a meal, and catch up. My mom had spent the whole afternoon cooking, her famous lasagna, homemade garlic bread, and, of course, the huge pot of her secret recipe pasta sauce. It had all the makings of a warm, comforting evening. But as soon as I stepped into the house, something felt off. You know that feeling when the air just seems heavier than usual, like something is lurking just beneath the surface? That was how it felt when I walked in. The usual chatter was missing. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone, not even acknowledging my presence when I said hello. My older brother, Mark, was pacing in the living room, his face tight with frustration. My younger sister, Emma, was sitting at the table, poking at her food, barely making eye contact with anyone. And then, of course, there was Aunt Kathy, who was already on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, probably arguing with one of her exes again. At first, I thought maybe it was just a fluke, maybe a bad day at work or something small that had gotten everyone on edge. But as the evening went on, the tension grew, thickening in the air like smoke. I tried to make small talk, asking Mark how work was, joking with Emma about her latest online shopping spree, but the responses were clipped, uninterested. My mom, bless her heart, was desperately trying to keep the atmosphere light, but I could tell she was stressed. She kept glancing at my dad, as if waiting for him to say something, to join the conversation, but he remained silent, scrolling through his phone with that same detached look on his face. Then, it happened. The moment that would turn everything upside down. Aunt Kathy, after finishing her phone call, hung up and slapped the phone down on the table with a little more force than necessary. The sound of the slap made everyone freeze. She looked around the table with a sly grin on her face, as if she had just uncovered some deep, dark family secret. "I know what you've all been hiding," she said, her voice low but full of mischief. I was about to ask what she meant when my dad finally spoke up, his voice strained, like he was trying to keep his anger in check. "What the hell are you talking about, Kathy?" My aunt's grin only widened. "You think I haven't figured it out? You've all been keeping secrets from me. From the family. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I did." Everyone was staring at her now, and I could feel my heart rate increase. What was she talking about? What secrets? My dad shot up from his chair, knocking it over in the process. "Stop making shit up, Kathy. There's nothing going on, all right?" But Kathy wasn't backing down. "Oh, really? Then explain this." She pulled a small envelope from her purse and slammed it on the table. My mom's face went white as she saw the envelope. "Kathy, don't," but it was too late. Kathy had already opened it, revealing a stack of papers. They were financial documents. I wasn't exactly sure what they were at first, but the look on my mom's face told me everything I needed to know. "What the hell is this?" Mark demanded, his voice sharp. "What are you trying to pull, Aunt Kathy?" Aunt Kathy didn't answer him. She just smirked, watching my mom, waiting for her to react. And then, in that moment, it clicked for me. I had seen those papers before. They were from a lawyer's office. And my mom had been avoiding going through them for weeks. But I had no idea why, and I had no idea that Kathy even knew about them. My mom stood up suddenly, pushing her chair back so hard it nearly toppled over. "I told you, Kathy, not to bring this up. I asked you to leave it alone." My dad stood too, his hands clenched into fists. "This isn't the time, Kathy. You've got no business going through our things. It's none of your goddamn business." But Kathy wasn't backing down. "Oh, I think it is my business. You think I don't know about your little business dealings behind our backs? The money you've been hiding? The debts you've been trying to pay off with dirty money?" That's when everything exploded. My mom started shouting, but I couldn't hear her words over the roar of my dad's anger. Mark, always the peacemaker, tried to step in and calm everyone down, but it wasn't working. Everyone was yelling, accusing each other of things I couldn't quite understand, throwing around words like betrayal, lies, and secrets. I was standing there, frozen, caught in the middle of something that had gone from 0 to 60 in seconds. My mind was racing. What was Kathy talking about? What did she mean by dirty money? And why had my parents kept this from me? I turned to look at my mom, who was standing there, her face a mask of shame and anger. I'd never seen her like this before. "Mom," I said quietly, almost afraid to hear her answer. "What's going on? What's this all about?" My mom shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "It's not," she broke off, unable to finish her sentence. And then, in the most unexpected turn of events, my dad spoke. His voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it. "You deserve to know, I guess." He paused, looking at each of us in turn. "There's a reason I've been so distant. There's a reason I've been shutting you all out. I've been trying to protect you from what's been happening." He glanced at Kathy, his face filled with disgust. "I made some bad choices years ago. And I've been paying for them ever since." Kathy's laugh was sharp and cold. "Bad choices? You mean illegal choices?" My dad didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his face tense, his hands still clenched into fists. My heart sank. I had always seen my dad as this strong, invincible figure. The one who protected us. The one who had it all together. And now, standing there, I realized I didn't know who he really was. The truth came out in pieces, as everyone started yelling over one another. It turned out that my dad had been involved in some shady business dealings, trying to fix some bad investments and, ultimately, got caught up in something he couldn't get out of. And Kathy, well, she had known about it all along. She had been the one to warn him to come clean, but he never did. She'd been trying to protect us from the fallout, but it was too late now. The damage had already been done. The family dinner that was supposed to be a time to catch up and share laughs turned into a full-blown confrontation, a chaotic mess of secrets, lies, and accusations. The rest of the evening was a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and questions that didn't have any answers. Mark ended up storming out, unable to handle the tension any longer. Aunt Kathy left, too, but not before saying something I'll never forget. "You'll all be fine. But your dad. He's going to pay for what he's done. And so will you." The words haunted me long after she left, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was just beginning. It's been weeks since that dinner, and things haven't been the same since. The secrets are out in the open, and nothing will ever be the same. My family is broken, but we're all still here, trying to pick up the pieces. But what happened that night, what was said, will haunt me for a long time. And no matter how hard we try to move on, I don't think we'll ever forget the night that a simple family dinner turned into something we could never undo. My boss expects me to work on my wedding day. Should I quit? It all started as a dream job, a position I had worked tirelessly to secure. The thrill of working in a fast-paced marketing agency was intoxicating, and I poured my heart and soul into every project. But as my wedding day approached, everything began to unravel. My fiancé, Jake, and I had spent months planning the perfect ceremony, poring over every detail, and visualizing the day we would finally say I do. I was ecstatic, ready to celebrate the love we had built together. However, just 2 weeks before the big day, I received a chilling email from my boss, Kelly. It was a reminder about an important client meeting scheduled for the same day as my wedding. My stomach dropped. I was hopeful that it was just a misunderstanding, so I replied, politely requesting to reschedule. But when I approached Kelly in person, I was met with a steely gaze. "You're the lead on this project. We can't afford to lose momentum, especially with this client," she said. "You have to be there." I felt the walls closing in. "But it's my wedding day, Kelly. I can't just cancel or push it back. It's important to me and my family." Her expression didn't change. "I understand, but this is a crucial time for our company. You can't let your personal life interfere with your work responsibilities." The weight of her words hung in the air, and I felt a mixture of frustration and helplessness. I had always been committed to my job, often going above and beyond. But this felt different. This was my wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime event, and I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of having to choose between my career and my personal happiness. I went home that night, feeling utterly defeated. I tried to talk to Jake about it, hoping he would support me. But when I explained the situation, his brow furrowed with concern. "This isn't just a job, honey. You love what you do, and I know how hard you've worked for this position. Maybe it's worth considering what Kelly said." I couldn't believe my ears. "You think I should skip my wedding for a client meeting? Jake, this is our day. I've dreamed about it since I was a little girl," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm not saying that. But you don't want to burn bridges either. Can't you find a way to make it work?" I felt torn, the pressure of expectations weighing heavily on my shoulders. I spent the next few days in turmoil, trying to find a solution. I reached out to colleagues for advice, hoping someone would have a suggestion that could help me navigate this mess. But everyone seemed to echo the same sentiment: you can't risk your career over one day. It felt like a betrayal, and I began to question the loyalty of my coworkers. Each day that passed brought more anxiety, and I found myself constantly refreshing my email, waiting for any sign of understanding from Kelly. The day before the wedding, I decided to go in early, hoping to catch Kelly and explain my side one last time. The office was eerily quiet, and I could feel the tension in the air as I approached her office. When I knocked, she looked up from her computer, a mixture of surprise and irritation crossing her face. "What is it, Jenna?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I just wanted to ask if there's any way we can reschedule the meeting. I understand the importance, but it's my wedding day, and I really can't miss it, Kelly sighed, her patience wearing thin. I've told you before, this is non-negotiable. You need to put your priorities straight. This is a pivotal moment for our company, and I expect you to act accordingly. I felt my heart sink. I can't believe you're saying this. You're really going to make me choose between my job and my wedding? She shrugged, completely unfazed. You've made your choice by being here. Just know that if you're not there, it will reflect poorly on you. I stormed out of her office, a mix of anger and despair swirling inside me. I had been pushed to the limit, and I felt betrayed by a company I had devoted myself to. When I got home, I couldn't hold back the tears. What am I going to do? I sobbed, and Jake pulled me into a comforting embrace. You have to stand up for yourself, Jenna. You can't let them dictate your life. His words ignited a fire within me. I was tired of feeling like a puppet on strings, forced to dance to the whims of someone else's expectations. That night, I made a decision. I didn't want to live with the regret of sacrificing my happiness for a job that wouldn't hesitate to replace me. I drafted my resignation letter, pouring my heart into it. I explained that I loved my job but couldn't compromise my personal life for the sake of a client meeting. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me as I clicked send. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, but also nervous about the repercussions. I still had to face Kelly, and I couldn't shake the anxiety of what would happen next. As I arrived at the office, I steeled myself for the confrontation. Kelly's expression was one of fury as I walked into her office, the resignation email still fresh in her inbox. You think you can just walk away like this? She snapped. You're making a huge mistake. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. No, I'm making the right choice for myself. I won't sacrifice my wedding day for a meeting. She leaned forward, her voice low and threatening. You'll regret this. Do you really think you can find a job that respects your priorities? You're going to be labeled as unreliable. I stood my ground, feeling a sense of clarity. I'd rather be unemployed than work for someone who doesn't value my personal life. I want to live my life on my own terms. Her face reddened in anger, but I turned on my heel and left her office, a sense of finality in my decision echoing in my heart. The moment I stepped outside, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free. I spent the next few days finalizing wedding details, soaking in the joy and excitement. On the day of the wedding, as I stood in my gown, surrounded by family and friends, I felt a profound sense of happiness. Jake looked at me with so much love, and in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. We exchanged vows, pledging our lives to each other, and every worry about work faded into the background. I had taken a stand for myself and chosen love over corporate expectations. In the weeks that followed, I started a new chapter in my career, one that aligned with my values and priorities. I found a job that appreciated my contributions and recognized the importance of work-life balance. Looking back, I realized that sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most rewarding outcomes. If you're reading this and find yourself in a similar situation, remember, your happiness and personal life should never take a backseat to someone else's expectations. Always prioritize what matters most, and never be afraid to stand up for yourself, even if it means making tough decisions. I remember the day I became a mentor like it was yesterday. It started off as any typical Tuesday, the kind where the sun rises lazily and the world outside my window felt distant, almost surreal. I was just getting into my groove at the community center where I volunteered, teaching kids how to paint, when I received a peculiar phone call. The voice on the other end was a soft whisper, almost hesitant. We need your help. There's a child who has no one. And we think you're the right person for him. I admit I was taken aback. I had always believed mentorship was a two-way street, where I impart wisdom while the mentee reflected on their experiences. But this felt different, like I was being pulled into a world I didn't know existed. Before I could say more than an uneasy sure, I found myself agreeing to meet a boy named Lucas. When I arrived at the designated place, an old, abandoned park on the edge of town, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. The swings creaked with the wind, and the trees loomed over the playground, casting long shadows that seemed to dance unsettlingly in the late afternoon light. I was just about to turn back when I heard a soft sobbing coming from behind a rusted slide. It was him. Lucas was a scrawny kid, hardly more than 10, with unruly hair and eyes so large they looked like they could swallow the world. He was sitting there, clutching a faded teddy bear with one eye missing. When he saw me, he flinched, as if I were a ghost. I approached him gently, kneeling down to his level. "Hey there, I'm here to help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It took a moment, but he eventually opened up, each word tumbling out like the last leaves of autumn. Lucas told me he felt invisible, lost in his own home, surrounded by people who didn't seem to notice his struggles or fears. As he spoke, I felt something shift inside me, a stirring recognition of my own childhood. It was like looking into a warped mirror, seeing a version of myself that I had buried long ago. With each passing conversation over the next few weeks, I learned more about Lucas. He loved drawing, his family life was a snarl of chaos and neglect, and he had a penchant for inventing wild stories about imaginary friends. But there was something darker lurking beneath the surface, a sense of despair that seemed almost palpable, like a storm cloud hanging over him. One evening, after a still air had settled around us, he confided that he had a secret. "They're watching me, you know," he whispered, glancing around as though expecting a specter to leap out from the shadows. "Who's watching you?" I pressed, my heart racing out of dread for what I might hear. "The shadows. They come when I'm alone. Whispering things." I took a deep breath, torn between wanting to comfort him and the nagging sense of dread creeping down my spine. "Lucas, sometimes shadows can be just our imagination. They can't hurt you." But he shook his head vehemently, with eyes that burned with unspoken terror. "You don't understand. They want to take me." I couldn't shake the pit of unease in my stomach as he spoke those words. As a mentor, I was supposed to guide him, instill hope, yet here I was, feeling an echo of his fear creep into my bones. Days turned into weeks, and just as I was beginning to break through to Lucas, things took a dark turn. He stopped showing up to our meetings, and texts went unanswered. Concern morphed into outright anxiety. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I drove by the park each day hoping to see him again, clinging to the memories of his laughter as we drew together, until one gloomy evening, I caught a glimpse of him standing by the slide, staring out into the distance, the same lost look on his face. When I stopped the car, he fled deeper into the park, and I instinctively followed, driven by an unrelenting worry. As I ran, twisted branches snagged my clothes and the ground became treacherous underfoot. When I finally found him, he was sitting on the dirt, knees drawn up to his chin. Lucas was staring into a set of old, broken mirrors propped up in the thicket, their shattered glass glinting ominously in the dusk. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Why did you run away?" I asked softly. But he didn't respond. Instead, he reached towards the mirrors as if entranced, murmuring something under his breath. "Lucas, please look at me," I begged, the panic rising as I realized he was drawn into the specter of his own fears. The shadows around us grew thicker, whispering words incomprehensible and heavy, and I steeled myself as I reached out to grab his shoulder. The moment our skin touched, a sensation, cold and raw, burst through me, and I stumbled backward, blinded by a sudden flash. The mirrors warped, twisting the very fabric of reality around us. I saw moments from my own childhood reflecting back, echoes of loneliness, shadows uncomfortably similar to the ones Lucas had spoken of. Before I could make sense of it, the world rippled, and I felt a sinister presence loom, dark and consuming. Every doubt, every forgotten fear I had buried began crawling back into my consciousness, leaving me gasping at the bottom of an icy well of despair. Lucas screamed, the sound tearing me away from the suffocating darkness, and I rushed back to him, shaking him lightly. "Lucas. You're stronger than this. We're in this together, remember?" He blinked rapidly, and for a moment, I saw clarity break through his fear. But just as swiftly, the shadows surged, reaching toward both of us, whispering promises of being unseen, of being abandoned. "What do you want from us?" I shouted, determined not to be swallowed whole by this malevolent force. The reflections in the mirrors seemed to writhe at my words, and suddenly, Lucas grasped my arm tighter, no longer just a frightened child, but a companion in this bizarre horror. "They want us to give up," he whispered fiercely. My heart thundered in acknowledgement. Maybe that was the lesson I had needed to grasp. We weren't just mentor and mentee, we were allies against the shadows that sought to engulf us. With newfound resilience, we faced the mirrors together. No more, we shouted in unison, and as the words left our lips, the glass shattered around us, casting shards that sparkled like stars against the dark ground. The sharpness scattered the shadows into dust, and I felt a rush of light, warm and embracing. Lucas wasn't just finding his footing, I was unearthing my own forgotten strength. When the shimmer faded, we stood panting but unharmed among the remnants of the broken mirrors. The park, once grim and haunting, revealed a different landscape, sunlit and alive with color. Lucas, with his eyes wide and glimmering, grinned at me, and in that moment, the realization sank deep within me. I hadn't just mentored him, he had pulled me from the darkness, restoring a part of myself I didn't know I had lost. After that day, we carried on, our bond forged in a battle against shadows far more powerful than either of us anticipated. Everything changed after that. Lucas flourished in ways I could have only hoped. He began to share his artistic talents with the world, creating breathtaking murals that adorned the community walls. I often stood beside him, a proud mentor transformed into an unwavering supporter. The scars of our shared experience didn't fade, but they morphed into reminders of resilience and transformation, living testaments to how loneliness could turn into camaraderie. My perspective shifted in that strange park, watching a boy courageously face the darkness. I had entered as a mentor but emerged as a student of my own life. In moments when the shadows would whisper again, I knew I had the strength of companionship, a bond that would always guide me home. Now, whenever I look back on that day, the day I became a mentor, I can't help but smile, appreciating the new perspective it granted me, a reminder that sometimes, you find strength in surprising places, often when faced with the most unexpected battles.